Why did the United Provinces of Central America exclude indigenous people? Imagine building a new nation after fighting hard for independence, only to leave out some of the very people who lived there long before. That's what happened with the United Provinces of Central America. When these countries gained independence from Spain in the early 1800s, their leaders wanted to create a unified, modern nation. But they mainly focused on the ideas of European Enlightenment and the interests of mestizo and Creole elites. These leaders were mostly descendants of Europeans and mestizos, and they wanted a strong, centralized government. They believed that indigenous communities, who had their own languages, customs, and land systems, might resist or threaten this new order. Colonial times left a deep mark on how society was structured. Indigenous peoples were placed at the bottom of the social ladder, seen as backward or unfit for political power. The new leaders wanted to promote a mestizo identity that mixed European and indigenous roots, but they didn't want indigenous peoples to have real political autonomy. They saw indigenous communities as obstacles to progress and national unity. There was also a real fear of uprisings. During colonial rule, indigenous groups had revolted several times. The leaders worried that giving indigenous peoples political rights might lead to unrest or challenge their authority. To keep control, they kept indigenous communities out of government and political decision-making. Another reason was the push for centralization. The new nation wanted to unify different regions under one government. Indigenous communities often had their own ways of governing and land rights. Including them would have complicated the effort to create a single, strong state. Excluding indigenous peoples made it easier for the government to control land and labor, which were vital for economic growth. Many indigenous groups lived in remote areas far from the capital cities. This geographical distance made it easier for the government to ignore them and kept their voices unheard. Their cultures and histories were often left out of the national story, making them invisible in the new republics. This pattern of excluding indigenous peoples was common across Latin America after independence. Countries like Mexico, Colombia, and others also prioritized the interests of mestiz and Creole elites over indigenous rights. In the case of the United Provinces of Central America, which lasted from 1823 to 1840, this exclusion meant indigenous communities were denied citizenship and political rights. This decision had long-lasting effects. It created inequalities that still influence the region today. Indigenous heritage remains an important part of Central American identity, but it was often pushed aside in the early years of nation-building. Understanding this history helps us see why indigenous peoples in Central America continue to fight for recognition and rights.